Hello, everyone. I am Lauren Van Himmert from RDU on Stage, and I am here with the lovely Kristi Vincent Johnson, who directed and choreographed The River Speaks of Thirst, which will premiere this week, right? From Justice Theater Project. Mm-hmm. Very exciting. And we're going to get into all of that, but I want to talk a little bit about you first, Kristi. Okay. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we will try to get to them. And Moses already is on here. The trailer looks amazing. The trailer does look amazing. And hopefully I will get to share my screen and show it to everyone. But before we get to that, Kristi, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for hanging out with me. This is lovely. You grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk a minute about your upbringing. How did growing up there inform who you became as an artist?
Oh, wow. I've always danced. So that's always an interesting topic. I did not grow up in a dance studio the way a lot of my peers did. And I think I always wanted to, but it just didn't happen that way. I started training seriously when I was 13. I went to an arts magnet high school, Scotlandville Magnet High School in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And there I met a lady by the name of Molly Bookman. And Molly ran the dance program at Scotlandville, but she was also the director of the Baton Rouge Ballet Theater. And she played a huge role in my life in terms of where I am with dance. She introduced me to a whole new world of dance that I had never seen. I was always, involved in social dance at that time, hip hop. I did some jazz. I took classes here and there, but just truly being steeped in a dance studio and really getting continuous training every day, I was not getting that. And so going to her every day really changed me. It changed how I thought about who I was as a mover, because it went from being fun to maybe I'm kind of good at this. I don't know. Maybe there's something to this. She really, zeroed in on me and encouraged me to come take class at her studio. She always told me I was the youngest dancer she ever let choreograph on the company in high school. Mm-hmm. And so basically she served a role as kind of my dance mom. And so when I finished college, I went to Southern University and I was on the dance team there, which that was a huge goal for me back then. The Southern University Dancing Dolls are, back then for me and still now, the epitome of HBCU dance teams. And not even just HBCU, but they are very well known for their technique, for their showmanship, for their class. And the band as well. So that was living 15 minutes from the campus. What little girl wouldn't want to be a part of this group of women? So I danced in college. And when I finished college, Ms. Bookman contacted me. And by that time, she was the director of dance at LSU. And she said, I need a jazz dance teacher. And you're the first person that came to mind. And I thought to myself, oh boy, well, this wasn't what I planned to do with life. My plan was to be an occupational therapist. It's way off the mark. And my father, right before he passed, kind of an interesting scenario, the way that happened, he told me, he said, go with Miss Bookman. She's always looked out for you. Give it a try. Before you go off to get your master's, give this a try and see how that works. She's always taking care of you. And I did, and the story wrote itself from there. So just a taste of my first job being at LSU as a dance professor, it just changed. I thought to myself, you mean to tell me everything I've learned, I can get paid to, and I loved, and I was like, I can get paid to do this? I was sold. And so basically, I mean, Baton Rouge's culture, You had a lot of jazz dance, you had a lot of ballet dance, dance teams were huge. And I soaked all of that up. And I really just allowed myself to be involved in the arts in any way possible. I played piano classically for 12 years. I just tried to do anything I could where I could be in an environment where the arts were. It wasn't always easy, but yeah, that's my story with Baton Rouge.
Do you find that playing an instrument, I grew up playing the piano, and I took ballet when I was little, and full disclosure, I was the worst ballet dancer ever. Nobody ever wanted me to go to a dance program or compete. But I did compete competitively with piano, but I would find when I was taking dance that because I had learned an instrument, I was able to visualize music in my head. Do you find that as a choreographer and dancer?
Oh, without a doubt. I played clarinet for maybe 7 or 8 years, and then played piano for 12. And so it was really interesting when I was at Jacksonville University teaching, and some of the musical theater students were in my class. I could teach them dance through music language. And I realized how that really contributed to my ability to speak to different students in a different way, as well as when I was dancing, understanding the musicality, completely changed when you play the piano, and now you hear that music and you're able to, I'm not sitting at the piano anymore. Now I'm dancing to it. You're able to connect in a different way. So definitely those two things went hand in hand, without a doubt.
Do you feel as a dancer, especially as someone who's teaching dance at the collegiate level, that students pursuing a performing arts career, wanting to become professional dancers, would you suggest they do learn an instrument, or at least learn how to read music?
Well, not if it's not an interest they have. I do encourage interdisciplinary studies, whether that be if you have an interest in theater, and you think you like dance, without a doubt, go for it. If they think they like music, if they tell me, well, I like singing, but I've never taken classes. If you like it, yes, let's take a class and find out what's really there. So I think once they express that they have an interest in it, I without a doubt encourage them, because they never know what's behind the other side of that door, and so it's always interesting when you take that class, what you discover about yourself. So yes, if they express that interest, I push for them to, to follow that.
And the really interesting thing to me now, looking at especially musical theater on Broadway, when I was young, there was such a definitive line between dance and musical theater. But with the advent of shows like Hamilton, and I saw a gorgeous show before the shutdown that I really do hope goes to Broadway, called The Wrong Man. And the way they used choreography in that piece to advance the story was brilliant. But to me, Broadway and dance on Broadway has evolved to such a refined level, and there's so many amazing choreographers who were classically trained working on Broadway now. So I feel like that the lines between dance and musical theater are much more blurry than maybe when I was growing up, or when you were growing up. It just seems like the line is blurred for sure.
Yeah, I think now, I think it goes back to that whole interdisciplinary component. I think, dancers are expected to be more versatile, truly be artists. I think we're really seeing that, where we're seeing more triple threats, and it's something that's encouraged. So yeah, I definitely, I believe you. I agree with you.
Yeah, definitely. You received, as you said, your Bachelor of Science from Southern University, which is a public, historically Black university. And then you received your MFA in dance from Texas Christian University, which is not an HBCU. And now you're working as a director of dance at Central, North Carolina Central.
Mm-hmm.
When I've spoken to other people on this program, many of them, and I've asked, what piece of advice would you have for those Black and brown students who want to go into performance and are looking for BA programs in the performing arts?
Mm-hmm.
Many of them, including Dr. Asabi, who we all love, said that her advice would be to find a historically Black college or university for undergrad so you can hone your skills in an inclusive environment.
Mm-hmm.
And then the MFA can come anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree with that?
I do. Now, when I was at Southern University, I did not major in the arts. However, I can relate my experience from undergrad to graduate school, in that same way. So I think when I was at TCU, which I loved, I couldn't have gone to a better school. Professors there nurtured me, and still to this day, I have a relationship with them that I cherish. But when I arrived, there were maybe 5 African-American dancers out of 80. And I think had I had not gone to an HBCU, I would have been lost as an artist. I think when you see the majority and their aesthetic aligns, they have the same aesthetic, they move in the same way, they do these things, in the same way, the culture there, and you come into that culture and you realize you're different. If you have not been to an HBCU, your first inclination is to join them. If you have been to an HBCU where you are comfortable in who you are, and you know that there are 9,000 other students who look like you, who think like you, who move like you, maybe not all 9,000 at Southern University Dance, however, you know that culturally there's a large group of people who think and feel the same way you do. You don't feel like an outsider. And so I was able to stand very strongly in who I was. And not that they ever pushed me in one way or the other, they didn't. It's something that just goes with the territory when you're in a very small minority. When you take choreography class, you see the way other students choreograph, and you start thinking, well, maybe my work should look like that. If you have a sense of self, then well, my work doesn't look like hers, and it's okay that it doesn't, because I come from this background and this is what my culture is about. It just really helps you ground who you are and have experiences that I think you need to go out into the world and be comfortable with your own voice. When I was at TCU, and again, wonderful experience, but I did not have very many African-American guest artists who came in. And during that time that I was there, I had one African-American professor in my 2.5 years there who came, I think, my last year. And just when he arrived, there was something different about my conversations and how I was able to relate to him and he was able to relate to me. So it matters. It really does matter. But I will say that because I went to an HBCU, it really did help me. It really did help me. It really helped me stay grounded and just feel comfortable being who I was.
And those are the formative years, those first 4 years of college. That's where you're figuring it out. You're finding your voice. And I totally get that. So I really thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that.
No problem.
there's been such a rising up in the We See White American Theater movement in the last year. We talked for a minute before we went on camera, before we went live. Several guests I've had on this program have talked about the fact that they feel that building anti-racist systems begins at the educational level. As an educator, as a professor, an assistant professor at NCCU, do you feel that's the case?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Going back to my dance education, in my dance history class, when we spoke about African-American choreographers, it was one chapter. Out of a year of taking dance history, one chapter. And so if you make dancers of all backgrounds, if you make them believe that African-Americans or people from other ethnic groups, if you make them believe that they only contributed this much, how much do they value their work? How much do they believe that what they are doing was constructed by somebody who did not look like them? Contemporary dance did not just come from one race, one group of people. There were many hands involved in building what we know today as American contemporary dance. But in our dance history classes, if we do not teach that there were many hands, it changes how we expect our students to value our African-American choreographers and people of color. Additionally, if ballet is a required course and West African dance or tap or jazz is an elective, what are we saying? What are we saying? That ballet is required, modern dance is required, but tap, West African, jazz, that's an elective, that's not required. And those are dance forms that are rooted in African-American culture. And so if you're casting that to the side as not falling into the core curriculum, you are conveying a certain message. And so it is very important that we create that balance in our curriculum, that we try to give these various dance forms value, the same value, equal value. So that's huge. That's in many schools that I've been to, jazz has been an elective. I will say at Jacksonville University, when I was there, jazz was not. It was equally required with ballet, modern and modern. So some places it's there, but not all. And so I think that, that's a start. That's a start. There's so many things we have to do in the language we use, in the way we structure our classes, in the way we're teaching our history. There's a list of items to address, and it won't happen overnight. But these are things that I have discussed with other colleagues, and I've even seen a really strong attempt to bring in more full-time, not just adjuncts, but more full-time professors of color. I have seen that just in the last year, and so things are starting to happen, but there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do.
Do you think with the popularity and success of dancers like Misty Copeland, and right now there's a beautiful dancer in Seattle, Ashton Edwards, with the success and popularity and publicity that these dancers are getting, do you think more because Black and brown students are beginning to see themselves represented in those spaces, do you think there's some sort of cultural shift in the dancers we're going to see in main stage companies?
I hope so. That's all I can say. I hope so. Is there a cultural shift that's happening? I'm not sure.
I don't know.
I
don't know. I hope there is. I hope so.
Yeah, that's why all I can say is I hope. I mean, Misty Copeland has opened a lot of eyes for some people who don't normally pay attention to ballet. And to see a brown dancer achieve the success that she has, it has awakened more people to what possibilities are for dancers of color. But is there a cultural shift happening? I'm not sure.
And maybe with popularity of like Debbie Allen, I know she had a show which we were binging Dance Moms in my house over this pandemic, and I felt like Debbie Allen's show was counterbalancing all the horribleness on Dance Moms. So maybe with the popularity of shows like that, we will start to see some sort of cultural shift, because I think it's far more interesting when you see Black and brown and white and Asian and every kind of dancer on stage. It's far
Yeah.
more interesting to me.
I agree. And it's, you know, it's a shame, but it's beautiful at the same time that you see dancers now. I see on Instagram dancers saying, I bought my first pair of brown point shoes. It's 2021. You know, it makes me sad and happy at the same time that that's happening. I see more moms of brown and Black families who are interested in allowing their daughters to do this, to take class, to invest in dance, invest in the arts, because their little girls are seeing these images. And it is giving them something to look up to, something to aspire to. And so, you know, that part I do see. I do see. You know, I do try to show my daughter as much as I can dancers who look like her. Because it's that same idea that if they can lose their sense of self if they are the only one in the room. And I have met so many dancers, so many brown dancers who have been the only one at their studio or the only one at their school. And for a time being, they're able to hold themselves together. But at the end of the day, there's a long lasting impact that happens on their identity. So it does feel good to me that some of this is happening, because I feel like when my daughter does take dance, if more brown dancers are there and more, you know, dancers of just other ethnicities, she starts to understand that she's not an outsider in the room.
She's not an other. She's not the other.
Right. She's a part of this. She's a part of that room. She belongs in that room. And so, you know, we can only hope that it starts there. These little girls who are seeing what's happening, you know, that's really where we have to focus on them to a certain extent. You know, so that's some of my thought, but is a cultural shift happening? It feels like it. I don't want to get too excited. It feels like some really good things are brewing. So
I hope so. And Maya said on Facebook, representation matters. You took the words right out of my mouth, Maya. Representation does matter, and it is game changing. And whether it is dance or the performing arts or you know, a scientist, any field, representation matters. So I want to pause for a second, because I'm going to share, I'm going to attempt to share my screen and share the beautiful preview of The River Speaks of Thirst, and then we can get into that, which is opening this week. So let's bear with me, everyone. You know, it's it's always hit or miss. It looks so stunning. This piece looks so unbelievable, and amazing. You've said that when you read Jackie Shelton Green's poem, Her Words, that there wasn't one aspect of the piece that didn't connect with you in some way or another, in some aspect of your life. Um, Talk to me about finding those connections with her words and why that was important to you as you went through this creative process.
So when I first listened to the poems, my goal was to really just contextualize them. Who is she talking about? Where are they? How and why, are these things happening? One of the poems that really stood out to me was I Wanted to Ask the Trees. And in this poem, she talks about the hanging of her great uncle. And so, as we know, numerous of our African-American ancestors were hung. And what I found so interesting, that as many things as I've read about hangings, what I never stopped to think about was her perspective. She wanted to have a conversation with the trees because she wanted to know, how did they feel having to participate in such a vile act? She wanted to know, how was nature affected by having to bear witness to these hangings? And how was the ecosystem in general affected by having to witness such evil? And that one poem, I couldn't get it out of my head. I think I went to bed that night and I kept saying, I wanted to ask the trees. I just kept saying that over and over to myself because it blew my mind. I had never thought about it that way. And so it made me, of course, think of my family. I found out a few years ago that my great-great-grandmother on my mother's side, my maternal great-great-grandmother, was one of the Georgetown slaves. And she was sold from the DC area, the Virginia area, to Louisiana, so that Georgetown could continue its academic programs. And so even though your ancestry is connected to slavery, that was the first time that I really, really knew. I knew, and it was my great, it wasn't even like my great, it was my grandmother's grandmother. So hearing some of these poems, and even the poem that talks about Juneteenth, and thinking about my great-great-grandmother, it just changed me. I don't think I'll ever hear poetry the same. Another poem that I listened to was Mad Woman. And Jackie talked to me about the poem being inspired by her mother, who used to work for a white family. And, what these women many, many, many years ago had to do to put food on the table and support their families. My great-grandmother was a maid for a white Jewish family in Louisiana. And so hearing her stories and listening to this poem, there again, there was that connection, which made that poem now, it made me think, were these some of the same experiences that my great-grandmother experienced? I never got to meet her, but I wondered, did she have a good relationship with this family, or were there times where she felt demeaned and belittled and wished that this was not the life that she had to endure? So there were numerous pieces that I listened to. Communion of White Dresses, and just going through all of them. Even listening to The River Speaks of Thirst, and she talks about our connection to the river and to the water. And how some of our ancestors who chose to jump overboard as opposed to be held in bondage, how their bones and their spirits are deep in the water. And so in some ways, we're still connected to that. We are a part of the rivers. We are a part of the water. There were so many themes and ideas that were so deep and so touching and so organic throughout the pieces that it made it, I'm not going to say easy, and not easy. It made it personal. It made it more so personal for me as I worked to try to paint these pictures that were inspired by her work.
Well, and I think when you make that connection, and it's as deeply rooted as you're describing, that translates into authenticity in the work that just cannot be fabricated. Mm-hmm. So I love that you shared that. Thank you. And thank you for sharing about your family. I often wonder, I lost my grandparents, and I also did not know my great grandmother, but have heard so many stories about her. And I always kind of wonder what's she thinking. I always kind of think they're with us. Mm-hmm. They're watching. You also say that part of your creative process is helping your performers and your cast mm-hmm. find those connections to create a relationship with the work. You work with a variety of dancers mm-hmm. at a variety of levels. Mm-hmm. So talk to me how, as a director and choreographer, you can nurture, or you do nurture, that kind of relationship. Are there rituals or exercises you start with before you get into actually teaching the steps, teaching the moves?
I think one specifically that comes to mind, the poem This I Know For Sure, which is the opening piece to the film. It discusses Juneteenth. And we all know Juneteenth as this celebratory, holiday or moment. But the way Jackie describes it, yes, it was a happy time without a doubt, but it was filled with anxiety, and it was filled with a nervousness, a fear, and how nature was excited that our spirits were set free on that day. And so I chose to set this on a bridge, because I think when we talk about Juneteenth, we never stop to think about what it felt like as an enslaved person to go from being enslaved all of your life to now today you're free. Where do I go? What do I do? When I get through the gates or walk through that door, what's on the other side of it for me? What does that mean? So while there is joy, there's a lot of fear. And so for me, when I listened to this poem, I thought about them crossing over this bridge, and this bridge being the psychological transformation of going from being enslaved to being free. And so my students were involved in this piece, and that's a hard concept to convey to them. And so we had a lot of conversations about this, about how would you feel? And while this is very different, for them, this is what made sense. You're in college right now, and you're going to walk across the stage, and now you're in the professional world. You have been set free. How do you feel? They were nervous. they're scared. They talk a lot about wanting to leave the nest, but they're terrified to leave the nest. And so it's not the same, but for them to really connect, it was about finding, something for them personal that they could relate this to. And so as we dance on this bridge, as we use these movements, this is what I want you to connect to. A sense of freedom that you've never known. And you have no choice but you're being thrusted into it. And what do? So for a lot of them, it was conversations. It was really letting them listen to the poem, helping them, allowing them to ask questions about anything they didn't understand, and then finding a way to connect that to present day. I think one of the most beautiful things that actually just happened today, one of my students, she is a soloist in the piece, A Letter from the Other Daughter of the Confederacy. And she is dressed in colonial attire. And she shared with her grandmother what this piece was about and the concept that we used to illustrate the piece. And she said her grandmother was so proud and showed her a picture of one of her ancestors that was dressed almost identical to her. She sent me the picture today. And she said, Miss J, thank you so much for letting me be in that piece, because look how much I look like my great-grandmother or great-great-grandmother. I'm not sure which one it was, but she was so happy to have connected with one of her ancestors in that way. And she literally sent me this at like 3:00 this afternoon. So there's just a lot of conversations and letting them know, if you don't understand it, it's okay. Let's talk about it. Let's look something up, let's find a picture of it. We just do our research, and we try to find something personal for them to make sense of and then put it into the work.
I wonder too, when you talk about anxiety, you talk about this historical trauma, that the legacy of historical trauma, how that plays against the backdrop of a pandemic, when this pandemic has affected marginalized communities exponentially. And caused so much anxiety in so many people. So how is it interpreting this piece at this moment in our history?
I'm not really sure the words to put to that. It made me angry at certain points. It made things pretty tough. I mean, just to be honest, because when you read the poems, and Jackie is she writes documentary poetry, which means these are real historical events. And so you read her poetry and you realize how long this has been going on, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting. But it was also an honor to be able to tell the stories at this moment in time, because some of the stories that she has put inside the poetry, it gives you hope. And it also is a way of combating a lot of what we are dealing with. So it had a therapeutic side to it as well. But it was a heavy weight, because it just made it so real that we're still, some of the stuff she wrote about from the past, here we are now, and we're still in it. And so that's probably the best way that I can express that, because it is such a traumatizing thought, that for years and years and years, you're still stuck in this same cycle of oppression and dealing with racism. But in some ways, there were so many parts of this that that were therapeutic.
Mm. Is choreographing and directing for film different than choreographing a piece for the stage? Was your approach different because you had this gorgeous landscape that you were choreographing against?
So this is my first time directing. So I will say for the choreographing part, it's different, but it's very similar. And I say that because I have choreographed site-specific work, which is where you find a space outdoors and the space as well as the intention of the work are related. And so this for me was very similar to when I've done site-specific work in the past. However, what made it different in terms of it being filmed, I found myself in this box where I was like, oh, but how do we get from here to here? And so my production assistant, who has been amazing, Jalen Moore, she would say, oh, we can cut to do that. And I was like, oh, I forgot there's a camera. And how lovely that I don't have to figure out how this person will completely transition over to the other side. So in some ways, after she said that, then I'm like, well, can we do this? And so it just opened up another door for me to play. But it was not, I wouldn't say it was harder, without a doubt. It wasn't harder. I think what was hard, if I had to use that word, if it was difficult, was just finding the right space. Finding the right space in the midst of the pandemic. But my process in choreographing, it stayed the same. It stayed the same. It was really about, once I found the right space, everything fell into place. And I have been all over the triangle. I've been all Raleigh, Cary, Chapel Hill. I have driven all over to find the spaces. I could see it in my head. And I would text my production assistant and even, the videographer, and I'd say, nope, that didn't work. And then I go, nope, that one didn't work. I was all over trying to find these spaces. I could see it in my head. And I'm like, I know I'm going to find it. I know I'm going to find it. And so, but once I found the space, everything came together. Because I had already sat down and kind of contextualized the poem. So I knew who the person was. I knew the progression of the poem, the progression of the work. And so it was a matter of now finding that landscape that you could place that within. And so when I would find the space, it's like, they would come down from here. They're going to walk, like it just all came together. It was very divine for me. It all came together. But the most complicated part was finding the space, having to venture out to all these spaces in the midst of the pandemic.
I feel like as you're describing these poems, there's such metaphor, there's such a personification of the river, of the trees. As you found your locations, did nature become almost the scene partner, the dance partner in these pieces?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Even in the finale, I think this was when I knew it was all coming together. And this was such a collaborative work. But the videographer, Carolyn Colquitt, who created original music pieces for the entire show, well, a large part of the show, she sent me the recording, the soundtrack for the finale. And she and the videographer had talked, and they had water sounds and birds. And so from being outdoors, they now brought that into the soundtrack. And so it truly, nature is fully a part of this piece, And it is because it's in the poems. It's nothing that I'm superimposing. It is a part of the poems, as Jackie speaks about so much of the African-American experience. She talks about it in terms of, in terms of the river, in terms of the wind and the butterflies and the trees, and how all of these things work together with our spirits. And so it was very important to me that we were able to feel that and see that in the work. So yes, nature became the backdrop. It became the center of some of the pieces, but the movement it flowed right off of those spaces. It was really lovely, really lovely.
And I think so often what we've seen in virtual theater is so many theatrical pieces do not lend themselves to the film format. But it sounds like with this piece was made for this theater film hybrid, because you can tell it in a way that you wouldn't be able to do in a traditional proscenium stage. So I love this. You filmed outside, but you filmed recently. You just finished filming a few weeks ago. But you were filming amidst COVID. Talk to me about the safety protocols that were taken to keep the actors and the creative team and the tech people safe during this process.
The first thing we did is initially when we started in this process in December, when we sat down with the poems, of course, it was via Zoom, as opposed to being in a room together and being able to collaborate and discuss the poems. It was over Zoom, which it worked. But of course, being artists, we always want to be able to touch, feel, and taste. We want to be near each other. We want to have our energy close. And so, but it worked. We made that work. And in terms of spaces, we chose to go outdoors. We had an option to film indoors. And I said, if we're outdoors and if we find a way to safely socially distance, we can do this without our masks. I was very, very strategic in how many people I put in each piece and where they were. For example, the dance on the bridge, there are only 3 dancers, and I would not let it be more than 3. And it is probably one of the only times in probably the last 20 years that I've choreographed a dance where we did not touch. We made 0 connections with each other. Dancing wise, there are connections, but in terms of physical touch and, holding on to each other, which would have been a part of this because they're on this journey to freedom, that would have been a part of the choreography. But because of COVID, I made sure that we were always apart. In other pieces, we have 2 or 3 pieces where there are soloists, and that is to minimize how many people were together when we were filming. So various precautions were taken. 2 of them were filmed indoors. And of course we had masks. There were thermometers at NCCU as soon as you entered the doors. So various precautions were taken to make sure that everybody was safe, and we had no issues throughout the entire process.
Theatrically, or in the theater industry, whether it is from Actors Equity or the Screen Actors Guild, we're seeing all of these COVID guidelines come down. Even on the fight choreography, we did a live chat on fight choreography. There are COVID guidelines and protocols. In the dance industry, in the professional dance industry, are we seeing new protocols that are going to impact the kind of choreography we're going to be able to see on stage, at least in the near future?
What I can say right now with dancers is we're doing a lot of screen dance, and we're dancing outdoors quite a bit, and we're finding ways to dance outdoors more. And outside of that, I really am not sure. I really am not sure. But I think some of the things that we're seeing, I think, have been wonderful breaks from the norm for us. I know we're all dying to be back together, in one space without our masks and touching and connecting with dancers. But at the same time, being able to do this site-specific work we wouldn't have been doing that. My students would not have had this experience. We would have been in that wheel of doing the same thing over and over again, and you never really break that monotony. Every now and then there's this little moment where you step outside of the norm, but for the most part, you get very comfortable on this wheel. And so we had a wheel going here at NCCU. That in the fall semesters we did work with Durham Ballet Theater. We performed at festivals and conferences, and then in the spring we worked for our big spring concert. But that was our wheel. We never really stepped outside of that. And so for them this semester to now have this experience, to not only be a part of a film, well, I should say to not only do site-specific work, but to be a part of a film, this is something that I'll be considering from now on. This is something they are actually about to work on 2 more pieces that are going to be filmed at the North Carolina Museum of Art. And we're doing a collaboration with them. And so it's nice that they're going to have these experiences that we might not have allowed for had COVID not been here. So that's probably all I can speak to, because I see that happening throughout the Durham dance community. I see more outside performances. I see more site-specific work happening. I see more dance for the camera. I see screen dance happening more. And I'm thinking that's going to keep going even once COVID is over. But that's my perspective so far on that. I'm not sure.
I love that perspective. And I think that speaks to life too. I think we've all were kind of stuck on that hamster wheel, no matter what your profession is. And COVID has forced us all to look at things differently, reinvent the wheel a little bit. And what is springing out of that creatively is really stunning to watch. So it's very exciting to me to see what sticks after we do kind of get back to back inside and into our spaces.
Mm-hmm.
What was the biggest challenge of filming this piece?
I would say working in bubbles. When we were on Zoom, it worked for the most part, as we were discussing the poems and really trying to get on the inside of them. But then it was time to really create. Then it was time to choreograph. Then it was time for Miss Carolyn to sit down with the vocalists and create music. That's really hard to do virtually, because there's an energy that we feed off of with each other that you cannot get over the computer, or you can't get fully what you want over the computer. I'll say that. And so a lot of what we were doing, even now, if Miss Carolyn is working on a piece, she calls me and I'm trying to listen to it over the phone, as opposed to if we had a rehearsal, I would be there while she was, creating the piece and fine tuning it, and I could hear the vocalist with it. I made a point not to go to their rehearsals to minimize how many people would be in the space when they were working. And that was really difficult, because I had to have them call me, or they had to record it and send it to me. And that canned version that they sent to me over the phone or, on the computer doesn't sound the same as when they were in person. And so, but when they did get together, that's when the magic really started to happen. We had been talking about what we would do and how we would do it on the computer, and it didn't make sense to them, not fully, until they met up in the same space. Then the energy that they had with each other, their connection grew, and their bond. And so that's when we really started to see the work grow. So I would say it was just being, in these bubbles. I'm over here, the videographer's over here, my dancers are here. It was trying to keep that space between us while we were creating something that really needed us all to be, in one room, in one space. This was so collaborative in terms of there was a very strong connection between the music, the text, and the movement. And that relationship between the music, the text, and the movement, it had to be there. And for it to be present, we needed to be present with each other. And we couldn't all the time.
What do you hope that people will get from seeing this piece? What do you hope the takeaway will be?
I hope the takeaway will be to understand the power of language, how powerful language can be. I know that's Jackie's hope. And I also hope that in listening and seeing the illustrations of these stories, that they are educated about the African American experience. Because Jackie is a storyteller, and her stories are compelling and they're rich, and they help you to understand the human condition more. They help you to feel it and understand it. And when we feel and understand those things, it breeds relationships and builds community. And that's what her work does. And so it's my hope that, as they watch this piece, that they learn more about the African American experience and that they really understand how powerful words are.
I love that. And I've loved this conversation. Now I do want to come down to NCCU and see all my friends and see you in person and give you a virtual hug because we can't hug anymore.
I'm specializing in air hugs.
Yes, but this has been lovely. And you've made me so excited to see this piece, which does open this week. Folks can go to the Justice Theater Project website, which is on your screen, or there is a Facebook event page. There's going to be watch parties and other events surrounding this. There will be some talkbacks and conversations with Jackie Shelton Green, which will be very exciting. So I hope everybody will tune in to this really special. It sounds like it's really special, and I can't wait. Now I can't wait to see it. So thank you. And thank you for hanging out with me. I hope it was painless. I hope you said you were so nervous. You're so eloquent. So and thank you all for watching. Please tune in. Please support local theater. Please support our local artists. You know how important that is. And there's so many good pieces of art to see this week. So definitely put this one on your calendar. The River Speaks of Thirst, being produced by the Justice Theater Project and directed by the amazing Kristi Vincent Johnson, inspired by Jackie Shelton Green's beautiful poetry and words. So this is going to be amazing. Thank you everyone for tuning in. If you tuned in late, you can watch this from its entirety as soon as we go off the air. It'll be on Facebook, it'll be on YouTube, and it will be on the website in a couple of days. So thank you, Kristi, and just stay safe and healthy, and give Aya next door. Aya's teaching a class next door. Give her a hug for me, or virtual hug, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate this, and I enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, thank you. Me too. And everyone, tune in Wednesday night. I will be talking with Serena and David from Easy Beasy or Easy, I always get it wrong, Productions. And please come back Wednesday and join me for that interview, which also should be very nice. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a good night.